I am recording these sessions. Everything that I teach, I try to record and I put it online for you to use later. You know, if you miss class or something like that, need to review, you have it. That's kind of why I do it. Okay. So today we're going to talk about Chapter 8. Okay. Chapter 8 is all about verbal messages and language and how does language works and what does language do for us culturally speaking. Well, language is a little bit of a tough topic sometimes to talk about because we have different understandings what language is, but rudimentary, if you think about it. What language does, it allows us to put our feelings, what we feel or what we think, into words, right? And to communicate that or share that with other people. I mean, that's what language does. Whatever's going on the inside of us, okay? What we're feeling, what we're experiencing, what we're thinking, how we understand everything that is around us, we obviously understand that internally. We do not need language to feel or to understand, you know, or to even think. We don't really need language because we do that in our head intuitively. We don't put it in a concrete language. We put it in the concrete language when we vocalize it, when we voice it, okay? And that's really what language does. It allows us to communicate that which we think and feel to the rest of the world, okay? And sometimes that communication isn't perfect, okay? Because language is imperfect. And how other people understand language that you use is different than how you understand it. To you, it makes perfect sense because, of course, first it starts in your head, right? It starts inside of you where all these feelings and thoughts and ideas are. But the moment we put them into words, we're taking a risk on them not being understood in exactly the same way as we would have liked to convey them. So some of it depends on our ability, our mastery to communicate, how good of a communicator we are and how good of a, you know, how skilled are we in expressing something that we feel or think in an exact words, especially in the words that others would understand, because just any words will not do. Remember, communication has a goal, and we need to achieve that goal. So words can be very powerful. The authors make a point on page 265 saying that words can make you happy or sad or disgusted or angry or even incite us to violence. Okay, we've seen that. We've seen how people can be stirred up even to violence with words. Throughout history, for thousands of years, people have gone to wars because of words, okay? Because somebody has articulated something that has stirred them to such a degree that they couldn't stand by anymore, and they decided to enact violence. And so words are powerful. They can create emotions within us, and those emotions can manifest themselves in actions. So yes, language is incredibly significant when it comes to our human lives, and so it can communicate. It can hurt us really bad. If I really wanted to offend you, I can find probably 5 easy ways, you know, to make you feel bad. You know, if that's what I really wanted to do, I could do that. You know, language gives me the ability to do that. So and sometimes we use that ability. Okay, so that's the idea. Now, as the authors begin this chapter on a language, they try to explain an idea that language and culture are bound together. They're bound up. While language is just the means of communication, right? It's just something we use to convey whatever we think or feel or understand, or something that we need, a need we have. It really is the way we communicate it, the way we share it is very cultural, okay? And it's culture bound. It is, each culture communicates in their own unique way, okay? And whatever the social structure that you're around, whatever societal norms that you are surrounded by, is what actually going to dictate the way you communicate. A lot of times your social and your economic status, your education status will dictate the way you communicate, okay? You know that people who are highly educated communicate differently from people who are barely educated. You know that already. And you know that people who are entrenched in a particular culture communicate differently from people who are entrenched in a different culture. So in this whole entire social environment, basically the way we communicate is so diverse and so different from culture to culture, people to people, but then also class to class, ability to ability, social group to social group. We all have our own ways of speaking and communicating, okay? And that's what makes intercultural communication so difficult, is the fact that we are different, and the fact that we try to say the same things in an entirely different ways. Or sometimes we don't say them at all because we find it inappropriate to say those things out loud, even though we think them. So as we are living in a world that is more and more globalized, with this idea of globalization, where we have to do business with people who are not like us, we have to interact with people who do not come from the same culture in which we are comfortable and familiar with. We come in contact with people who speak multiple languages, and we have to learn sometimes how to speak multiple languages in order to succeed in life. So that is just the reality of our lives. For more people have been living in societies that are more or less homogeneous. So you know that there are some societies that have more people basically that are all more alike than different, follow more or less the same cultural precepts. But there are some societies that are incredibly diverse. And so even societies that are more or less homogeneous, they're experiencing need to learn other people's languages and understand how other people communicate. So language, the authors of this textbook explain, has actually several major functions that it fulfills. And before we get into some of the, more peculiar uses of language or specifics that this chapter wants to highlight, let's talk about some of these big picture perspectives, okay? The first and foremost, language basically transmits culture from generation to generation, right? I mean, how would we teach culture but with language? So we need language. And that's why this whole idea that language is so cultural, okay? When we use language, we can speak, we can write, we can show how we listen to other people, we can even talk to ourselves in our head, right? That's all essentially use of language. Even some people would argue that even thinking is a use of language. I do not know which language you think in. If you're multilingual, you may think in multiple languages. I know I do. I usually think in whatever languages I speak. So whatever my source language is, that's the language that I think in. But you're dreaming too. I mean, some people say, and I've always said that, I kind of am a big believer in this theory, that if you're learning a foreign language and you start dreaming in that language, that lets you know that you've achieved a certain level of fluency in that language. If you can subconsciously basically express ideas in that language, that means you're getting really comfortable in it. So language allows us to convey all these things, but at the same time, it's all about our social environment. The reason why we talk, the reason why we think, the reason why we do anything is because we are part of a society. We're part of the social environment in which we need to get things done, or we feel like we have to express ourselves to people around us. So we need help from other people. So we use language. And if you think about it even further, we even use language in seeking help from God. When we pray, we use language, right? This is just amazing. And yet when we use language, it is cultural. It is culture bound, and we follow a protocol that our culture has taught us of how language should be used. Okay. So language allows us for social interaction, even with God. Let's put it that way. Language also creates a certain social cohesion, because it is by the means of language that we're able to, for example, preserve our history. Now, I realize that there are some societies that don't preserve their history, or don't preserve their history very well. Let's put it this way. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but this does happen. There are some societies where literacy rates are very, very low. Most people do not read, and therefore, of course, they do not write. And since they do not read and do not write, they don't really preserve the past. Or if they do preserve the past, it's very little, and it's not done in great detail, okay? So some societies throughout history of this world have preserved their past very well by writing histories, and relating lives and details about the different events of people and nations and countries and all sorts of things. They've documented their civilization. Other societies have done nothing. They have not documented this civilization. They have not told us about their great speakers or poets or warriors, and we know so little because they left no records. So, but it is language that allows us to do that. Why in the world can we reach thousands of years back and actually know what happened and who was involved in it and what occurred? Is because somebody used language and preserved that record. So it allows us to, express our history and our heritage in that way. Another thing that language does is it allows us to express our identity. Okay, much of what we do in life is identity bound, and we teach our children how to be whoever we are, and we do that through deeds, but we also do that through language. That's one of our main means of communication. So we are creating certain cultural cohesion, identity cohesion through language. In fact, people who speak the same tend to band together into social groups, okay? Whether it's a national language that we're talking about, or it's a way of speaking, let's say a regional accent. So just think about it. The country you come from, okay? Are there people with regional accents? Or does everyone speak the same? Are there regional accents out there? Or does everyone speak the same? Would you recognize a person from one region of your country versus another person from another region of the country just by the way they speak? Could you tell that? Anybody? Is that real? Or it only happens in America?
No, we can.
Yeah.
We can here in America we can but in Brazil we have in the north and northwest and the south is really different the accent on the.
Okay. So you could do that. So would you say, Addison, would you say that people from certain social groups or certain cultures speak in distinctive ways in even in your country, and you would be able to figure out who they are by the way they speak?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think most of us can. And this is because our identity, our cultural identity, our social identity, our group identity is expressed through language. And what we do is we speak the way that the group that we belong to speaks, let's put it that way. And that's how we actually reinforce that identity a lot of times. Okay, so this is very very important. You will see cultures maintaining their unique ways of speaking, even if they're a small minority group within a larger group. They will maintain their unique way of speaking, and they do that through language. Sometimes they create their own alternative language, sort of say terminology, you know, their own words, their own phrases, how they say things. You know, English is like that, you know, quite a bit. And we'll talk about different varieties of English in a minute. But it allows us to sort of say group each other. I'm going to ask you another question, and you guys tell me what you think. Could you differentiate an age of a person by the way they speak? Let's say if you heard somebody speak, or you got a transcript or something like that. Maybe you didn't even see them. Maybe you didn't even hear them. But you look at the words. Could you tell if it's a young person speaking or a old person speaking? Is that possible? No, yes.
Yeah, I think more older, more formal, more polite.
More formal, more polite. Okay. So that's how you would tell.
Yeah.
Are there certain words maybe that they would use that others would not? Maybe slang?
Yeah.
People are more polite to speak on younger, no, just
Maybe young generation would use certain words that we would consider new
words.
or fashionable. And older generation maybe will use some words that we would consider old-fashioned or kind of falling out of use, right? Nobody talks like that anymore. We would say something like that. So there are ways of being able to tell whether people are sometimes, you know, which generation they come from or their education level or the region. The point is that our identity, whatever our identity is and however we define it, can be communicated through language quite effectively. And that's one of the functions of language, is to build that cohesiveness of identity a lot of times, which is why we tend to stick to the way what we like to talk with it, to kind of be within our own in-group. I'll tell you something really funny. Okay, so my wife was born and raised here in the city of Atlanta. Okay, and she's, you know, as native, you know, as it gets. Okay, I think her family came to United States on one of the original ships, you know, back from, I don't know, England or something like that, way back. So their family goes way back. She could trace it so far, and so she grew up here in Atlanta. But her parents were not from the South. They were not born and raised in the South themselves. They came from other places like, you know, California and, you know, Connecticut. And so because where they came from, they did not speak with a Southern accent, okay, an American Southern accent. But my wife grew up in the South. So even though at home she does not speak that way, she knows how to speak that way. And whenever she speaks to somebody who is from the South and somebody who has a distinct Southern accent, she can turn it on just like that. And she could start speaking the way they speak. She adapts. And I've watched her do this all the time, whether she's in the store or she's talking to someone on the phone. She turns on her Southern way of speaking, turns on that accent, has an entire conversation. And the moment she's done, she turns it off and she talks in a completely different way. She's able to adapt her dialect depending on who she's talking to. You know, and I thought about it. Why does she do that? Oh, why doesn't she just speak the way she normally speaks? Because she doesn't speak this way at home, not to everyone around us. And the reason why she does that is because she wants for the person that she's talking to feel that she's a part of their in-group, okay? And that's why she's doing that. She's trying to make them feel comfortable. So she speaks the way they speak. And we actually do, all of us do that to a degree. All of us do that to a degree. And it's a great skill of adaptation. But that's what language does. It allows us sometimes to create a connection and create a cohesiveness with people because of the way we choose to speak. And we can turn it on and turn it off sometimes. if we are versatile, if we know how to speak in different dialects or different regional accents, even if we want to, we can do that. So, some people do that quite a bit. Okay, so on page 269, the authors actually define for us what is language. So they say this: language may be thought of as an organized system of symbols, both verbal and nonverbal, used in a common and uniform way by persons who are able to manipulate those symbols and express their thoughts and feelings. That's a really good definition of language, actually, if you think about it. Let's break it down. Language may be thought of as an organized system of symbols. There's no such thing as a language that's not organized. Okay, languages always are organized. They have a pattern, they have a system, they follow a grammar. If there's no grammar in your language, then it's not a language, you're just making it up. Okay, so it's an organized system of symbols, both verbal and nonverbal. There's no such thing in language as nonverbal, because when we express ourselves, we use nonverbal means to communicate what we're saying a lot of times. And so it's really both. Language relies very heavily on nonverbal communication, even though it's vocalized. And it's important to say that it must be used in a common and uniform way. So again, if language is not used in a uniform way, we wouldn't be able to recognize what the other person is trying to say. If every time I pronounced certain letters, I pronounced them differently, you would be so confused you had no idea what words I'm trying to say. So there's a common and uniform way in which we use the language. Whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't really matter, by the way, as long as it's common and uniform. As long as we all agree that this is how we're going to say this word, we're okay. And it's used by people who manipulate symbols to express their thoughts and feelings. Remember, I told you that that words are not really words, that words stand for symbols, okay? Words stand for symbols, and symbols really stand for something more tangible in our mind, okay? If I say fruit, right, every one of you is going to think of some fruit. But what that fruit is going to be different, right? So fruit is a symbol in your mind of some sort. Even if I say apple, some of you are going to think about a green apple. Some of you are going to think about a red apple. Some of you are going to think about a yellow apple. You see, anyway I go about it, there's still some variance that happens. And so words are really symbols. And if I say apple, that doesn't mean that you can actually take a bite out of my word, right? Because it's still only a word, only a symbol of that object, not that object. You know, if I hold out the apple in front of you and hand it to you, that's a whole different story. So, you know, a word is a word, it's a symbol, it's an image, it's a picture, it's an idea. And they represent tangible things to us. But those tangible things we usually adapt in our mind, whatever they are. So our thoughts and feelings, whatever we feel and whatever we think, we try to express through a series of words which stand for symbols. And as long as other people interpret those symbols the same way, then we have a clear communication. When they don't, we don't have a clear communication. It breaks down. Then we have a hard time expressing what it is that we think or feel. So, which is why we need a system that's organized and uniform and commonly shared among us, which is what language is. Okay, so hopefully this makes sense. I think it's a really good definition of language. But anyway, definitely keep this one in mind, okay? So I explained, you know, the whole idea that words are only symbols. And the other idea is that words are arbitrary. Language is so unusual in a sense that we assign meaning to a word completely arbitrary. There's no reason why, you know, a particular word means something. Okay, there's no reason why we call a chair a chair. It's not like we call it that because there's some particular reason, you know. It's just a combination of sounds that means chair. Okay, something you sit on. Okay, that usually goes with the table. Things like that, but it doesn't have to. So it's when we say that the words are arbitrary, what we're really saying is that this collection of sounds that we use to assign a symbol to it and a particular meaning has absolutely no reason to be that combination of sounds. It could be any other combination of sounds, but for some reason we have chosen that combination of sounds. And that is exactly why languages from one to another will differ. That's why to say chair in Brazilian is going to be different from saying chair in Korean, okay? Portuguese will say chair how? You know, I don't know. What's chair in Portuguese? Teach me, guys.
Cadeira. Oh.
Cadeira?
Cadeira.
Okay. So how do you say it in Korean? Hyung-eun, tell me. How would you say it?
의자.
Wow, that is nothing alike. Nothing alike. Okay. Doesn't sound like a chair. Doesn't at all. Not even close. Like, how would we know? Like, but why in the world do you call that? You know, why do we say that? You know, but in different languages, you may hear a word and they say, "Oh, I think I know what that means," because it sounds a lot like a word in the language that you know, but it means something completely different. Okay, so sometimes people ask me to teach them Russian, so I'll teach them Russian, and they'll say, "Okay, how do you say a chair?" And I'll say stool. And if they're American, they always laugh. You know why they laugh? Because in American English, that is a term for excrement, medical term for an excrement. Okay. And they laugh and they say, "Why would you call a chair by that word?" I said, "Well, you understand that word doesn't mean that in this language." And sometimes you'll hear words and you say, "Oh, I think I heard a word I know." Oh, well, if it's a foreign language, the likelihood of that word that you heard having the same exact meaning than what you think it is, it's actually zero practically. Unless your languages are related, it's not going to be the same. I mean, a simple word like chair is going to sound different in every language, unless those languages come from the same family, let's put it that way. Then there will be some overlap. And so you see, it's like, and the meanings and the sounds that we assign, they're cultural and they're arbitrary. Why we chose that string of sounds to mean that, I have no idea. So basically, language, you know, words are arbitrary, and that for that matter, meanings of the words can also be arbitrary. There is something that I want you guys to know, and this is really important in the area of communication. I don't remember where the authors talk more about this in this textbook. Maybe they do this a little bit later. The idea is that the words can have denotative and connotative meanings. I don't know if that means anything to you right now, but I want you to think of these two terms and kind of, you know, note them. What is connotative and denotative meaning? Okay. Denotative meaning is the simple, plain dictionary meaning. Let's put it that way. All right. So dictionary meaning is what it means, just kind of a generic meaning to that word. All right. Literal meaning, conventional meaning, you can say that. If most people heard me say chair, what are they going to think about? If most people heard me say chair, they're going to think about something you sit on, right? It might be a different kind of a chair, right? It might be red, it might be green, it might be wooden, it might be, you know, covered by leather. I don't know, big fluffy chair, or you know, a bar stool or something. Who knows? Different kinds of chairs they might think about. But they're usually going to think about something you sit on. And that's going to be a very denotative, simple, basic meaning, that conventional meaning that most people would think. But if I was speaking to a bunch of prisoners, and I said something like this: this guy got the chair. What do you think they would think? If I say someone got the chair, are they going to think about a red chair or a green chair or a leather covered chair or a bar stool? What are they going to think about? How would they?
I think that is an electric chair.
That's right. They're going to think about electric chair, because in United States, there actually is a form of capital punishment and execution for somebody who has committed certain type or level of crime. You can get to the point where you get strapped inside the chair and they put electricity through your body and you literally die of electric shock. It's a horrific way to die. Sounds barbaric, sounds crazy, but that's a capital punishment. Nobody looks forward to that. But the idea is that now I use the word chair and it means something not normative. It means something else. And you have to, of course, interpret the connotation, which is why I brought in the idea of prison or criminals or something like that. And all of a sudden, the word chair means something else, right? So this is what we talk about, the connotative meaning. Connotative meaning is a private meaning. It's an emotional meaning, okay? It's the meaning that that word evokes. And sometimes it's the context, and sometimes it's the setting, and sometimes it's just a group of people, okay? And sometimes your connotative meaning is unique to you alone, okay? I don't know. But these emotional meanings mean things to us in a way that they do not mean something to another person, okay? I'll give you an example. Let's say you're afraid of dogs. Let's say you had a bad experience with a dog. Let's say you were bitten by a dog at some point, maybe when you were a child. That probably means you don't like dogs very much, you know. And you want to come visit me in my house, and I say, oh, that's great. You're going to get me to meet my dog. And at that moment, how do you feel? If you are afraid of dogs, you're going to shudder. You're going to try to find a way not to meet my dog, okay? You're going to try to say, hey, let's meet at Starbucks instead, or something like that. You're going to try to find a way to avoid that situation. Why? Because you don't like dogs. So when I say dog, to you, you immediately get scared. You immediately feel bad. You immediately remember that painful memory, right, that happened to you because of a dog. Whether to another person who grew up and had positive, you know, things about dogs. They loved, like, they had a best pet growing up that I just loved and adored, you know. And to them, you know, it means something special. And every time I say the word dog, they're going to get warm, fuzzy feelings inside of them and feel all good about it. And that's going to be completely different reaction. And this is what I mean by a connotative meanings to words. Words make us feel things, okay, because they mean something unique and special to us. Sometimes when somebody says a word, it awakens an emotional reaction because it has a unique private meaning to us. It could be a private meaning culturally, or it could be a private meaning as far as the social group that we're part of works, or it could be a private meaning on a very personal level because of an experience that we had, good or bad, doesn't really matter. So this is the difference between denotative and connotative meaning. Denotative is the simple, plain, literal dictionary meaning, if you want to think about it that way. And connotative is more of a private, emotional, specific meaning that you assign to that word based on your life experiences or group belonging, you know, how you understand that word. So hopefully that makes sense. So language and culture, the next section on page 270 to 71. The author tries to connect us to help us understand how we think and how our culture sort of say governs these ideas. If you do not realize that cultures think differently, you really need to grab onto this idea. Sometimes we think that everyone thinks like we do, but the truth is not that our languages only differ. Our thought processes and our perceptions differ. How we think from culture to culture is actually nothing alike. And a lot of times that is driven and shaped by the language we speak. So if you want to understand how people think, study their language. That is one of the best ways to do it. Okay. So in the field of communication, scientists have this term that they use sometimes, and they call it linguistic relativity. And that means that our languages create different realities for us, how we think, how we perceive the world. And in that sense, a lot of times when we voice something, it is relative to how our language understands it and how our particular language and culture interprets it. Okay. The way we define everything around us, the way we understand it, the way we perceive it is different. The way we express it is different. And the very thought pattern which we use to arrive to that expression is completely different. And this is why our languages and cultures are so diverse, essentially, because these functions form the core foundation of how we say, speak, express, and feel, and even articulate our thoughts. So how people feel about various aspects of life is going to be dependent on their language very heavily, okay? There are several things that the authors do to illustrate that, or to try to help us understand how different features of different languages make us think or feel or behave differently. And it actually is tied to language. You know, which came first, we don't know. Language or culture, cultural language. They're interconnected. They're symbiotic. They coexist. But the fact is that one affects the other is without a question. So think about this. There are languages that do not have plural forms. Okay? And then there are languages that have multiple plural forms. They express these ideas. There are languages that do not have future tense or past tense. Okay, not in a way that we think in English, for example. Okay, so maybe you're familiar with this. So again, being multilingual, bilingual, trilingual, quadrilingual, whatever, is a huge advantage because you're able to compare those languages, you know, and see how different they are. And if you've studied, even if you're not multilingual, but you've studied another language, you already start seeing that variance. Okay. And how much one language can put, you know, emphasis on one particular idea and develop that idea so broadly where the other language are not going to have even the right words for that, you know, sense. Okay. So if you look at the chart, which I think is really cool, on page 273, this illustrates the difference between Japanese words for different types of rice, okay, and US words for different cuts of beef, okay? It's fascinating. And the reason is, if you don't eat a lot of rice, okay, rice is rice. Maybe you have one rice, two types of rice, no, maybe three, and then that's it. Rice is rice. But if rice is a huge part of your culture, look at all the terms that people have for rice, or varieties of rice. That's, you know, how could you translate something like that into English? You can't. The truth is you really can't, because those things don't exist. You're speaking a language that is so peculiar, so unique, that it has no analogy in American English. So there's going to be miscommunication, you know, in that area. You will never be able to express that idea or even the importance of that idea to a person who does not understand that culture. And conversely, with the cuts of beef and things like that. So, if you go to American restaurant that prides themselves on steak or something like that, and they can talk about all the different cuts of beef and stuff like that, and you'd be like, what are you talking about? So something I know about Brazilian restaurants, they're big into beef. Okay, they have so many cuts of beef that they talk about. They're, of course, are all unique. And sometimes I would speak to a waiter and I would ask them what that means, and they say, well, it's just the cut of meat. So I'll go, which one? And sometimes they will be able to find an American equivalent, and sometimes they don't, because it doesn't exist, because it's a unique cut and a unique word that has no analogy. Okay, and they will tell me these words, and I'm like, okay, that's good. They'll explain. They'll still explain to me, but having a huge sort of, say, that churrascaria beef, culture, there's a whole slew of words that simply do not translate. So I say, it's okay, don't translate, just explain it to me. and that makes it fun. But this is how we are as languages. A lot of times we don't find these equivalents, and there's no way to find equivalents because of culturally what these things mean to us are either they're more important, less important, and we create words that other cultures simply do not even have. All right. So anyway, that's just my food illustration. I just kind of took me into that because I saw all the beef cuts and things like that. I think it's a great chart. It just gives us a visual appreciation for, language differences and how we think. This really has to do more with culture and thinking than with language. All right, so language variations. All of you are familiar with the idea of accents. We've already touched this idea. People have accents. They have regional accents. They have different accents that come with local particular way of pronouncing certain sounds in a certain way. Okay, accents could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Some accents are desired. Other accents are undesirable. Okay. You always want to speak in the way that everyone else speaks around you. Why? Because you want to fit in, because you want to succeed. So having an accent that is identifiable as an outside accent or minority accent is actually not good for you, in big picture, unless that accent is considered to be exotic and curious and desirable, and then all of a sudden, you get all the girls, right? Because they're like, oh, that's the cute guy who speaks with that accent. I really like that. So he's so different. He's so unusual than all the other guys because he speaks with this particular accent. So some accents, it could be an asset. It could be a deterrent. It all depends. It could be, some accents could be stereotyped negatively, and other accents could be stereotyped positively. Okay, so I think it's really funny. Occasionally I like to watch movies, American movies that are like based on a Bible. Okay, Bible movies. I find them hilarious for the most part. Why? Because my field is ancient history and archaeology and language and things like that. So I study these things in depth, and I spend a lot of time working in the world of antiquity. But I find these movies funny because the movie makers know so little about that world, and they kind of make things up as they go along. But one thing that I find consistent in all American movies about God or Bible or anything, whenever God speaks, he always speaks with a British accent. It's hilarious. I find it so funny. If God has an accent, it's always British. I don't know why. But for some reason, Americans idolize a certain type of a British accent. And so when God speaks, it's always in proper English with a very British accent. So I don't know why. But it's funny to me, and I laugh at it. So I don't know if anything analogous exists in your culture in movies about God. Does God speak with a particular voice? Does God's voice always deep when he talks to Moses at the burning bush? Or does God talk with a voice like this? And is that okay to talk like this if you're God? I find it so culturally hilarious that we kind of portray a particular image onto God and how he speaks. You know, does God have to be very macho to speak with deep voice, big, huge, strong muscles? You know, whatever we're thinking, we're portraying that. That's culture. That's accents. You know, I laugh at it, and I see that you guys are laughing with me because probably something similar exists in your culture as well. But I find it funny. So dialects, accents, and dialects. What is the difference between accents and dialects, by the way? Can anyone tell me the difference between an accent and a dialect? What do you think? Anybody? We are still talking about different ways of speaking. Go ahead, Alison.
I think accent is when I speak Portuguese and I try to speak English, I have an accent because I can't pronunciate it. I think dialect is what can I explain? So my family came from Germany, and in Germany they speak the formal German.
Yes.
And when they move from Brazil, they adapt the language and they speak a dialect. It's German, but it's different words and the spells different.
Okay. Okay. That's you tried to explain to me. Anybody else got a better explanation of the difference between dialect and
just for complete your movies and like God, a voice like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I will be back. But dialect in Brazil, we have different regions, and some regions have a special form to talking and language. Then sometimes we Brazilians don't understand the North people from Brazil.
Right.
Yeah, this accent is different, but they create new words or new conjunctions or a lot of things that define that different from the same language.
Okay, that's good. And so what you're describing now is more of a dialect, okay, than an accent, because an accent is still basically speaking the same language, but pronouncing certain sounds differently. Okay, stretching your ah too long, or making your ah sound like an aw or something like this. That would be more of an accent. But a dialect is a regional, usually a regional way of speaking. It really has to do with sometimes most of the time it's geographic, okay? Geographically bound. And it can have different grammar. It can have different vocabulary. Like people in that part of the country form their sentences differently or use peculiar words instead of the other words. You know, so I'll give you an example. Maybe something like this, just like that, exists in the country where you come from. But in America, in the South, in Atlanta, if you give somebody a can of Coke and ask them, what is it? They'll say Coke, or they'll say soda. They'll say it's a soda. But if you did the same thing with a person in, let's say, Maine, in the state of Maine, and you gave them a can of Coke and you said, what is it? They would say, that's a pop. That's a pop. That's what they would say. So the same exact item they would describe with two different words. And if a person visiting Atlanta goes to a restaurant and says, what kind of pop do you have? What they mean, okay, is what sort of a carbonated beverages do you have? Okay. And the restaurant worker would immediately know that that person is not from the South because they use the word that is typical to the North. They will still understand it because a lot of times we learn these differences of dialects from each other, but we don't use them. We use the one that is used here locally. And so when we have somebody come from the outside and all of a sudden they use the word that is used in the North, we know they're from the North, even though we understand what they mean by that. Now, sometimes we don't understand them because we simply are not familiar with those words. But a lot of times these regional dialects, little things, will be used throughout the same country, sometimes separated just by a few miles from each other. People will use different ways of, expressing the same idea, unique words that are typical to themselves. So besides pronouncing certain sounds a certain way, there's also a different grammar and different vocabulary as well. And that has more to do with dialects. Okay, dialects are much more like that. So hopefully that, clarifies the difference for you. There's other couple of features over here that the textbook features that you should know. For example, the term argot. Maybe you have never experienced this term. In fact, there's many Americans who do not know what argot is. But basically, argot is a specialized language. It is an insider language. Okay. Let's put it this way. It's similar to slang, but it's not the slang. Slang is a colloquial way of speaking. Slang is an idiomatic way of speaking. Slang is assigning meanings to words that don't really mean those things to everyone else. Creating new and unique meanings and using them within that in-group, and only your in-group really knows what that slang means, okay? And some slang words and slang is very temporary, by the way. Slang comes and goes. It can go very, very fast. Like a word can appear, it can be used a certain way for a decade, and then in a decade it's gone, okay? And nobody uses that word that way again, or that meaning is gone, let's put it that way. People start using that word in an entirely different way. Let's put it, in this way. So slang terms come and go very fast in our culture. As far as us, our cultures exist for thousands of years, but certain terms and how we use them may exist only for one generation, and that's it. And after that, it's gone. That's slang, okay? But argot is a more of a in-group language that a very specific, really well understood, well-defined language that insider groups have. To give you an example, let's say criminals have their own unique vocabulary of words that they use that other people, unless they're part of that in-group, they would not know. IT people. Okay, if you work in information technology, if you're a computer geek, okay, if you do programming, there are certain words that you use that are unique to you and to your industry that you would know, and everyone else working in your industry would know, but nobody else would understand. A medical industry uses their own terminology, okay? And unless you are a part of that industry, you have no idea what those terms mean. Most of them are actually even worse. They are abbreviated terms, okay? So I'll give you an example. So my wife was telling me about her brother just yesterday. We're sitting just chatting, and I said, "How is your brother doing?" And she says, "Oh, he's fine." I said, "How's his job?" And she says, "Oh, yeah, he started working as a EMT." I said, "He's back to doing that?" And she says, "Yeah, he's back to working as an EMT." You guys know what an EMT is? Okay, so see, we're already disconnecting. You're already not sure what job I'm talking about. Is it a political job? Is it a service job? Is it an office job? Okay, EMT is the guy who comes and saves your life when you have a car crash. EMT is the guy who comes and pumps you out when you pass out on the side of the road. EMT is the emergency medical professional. When you call 911, the first people that show up are the EMTs, okay? They're the emergency medical personnel, okay? And so she continued and talked to me about, oh, he's back to doing EMT. And then she said, and I said, so is he working a lot? And she goes, no, he's just working PRN. If you're in a medical field, you would know exactly what I said when I say PRN. But if you're not in the medical field, You have no idea what I just said. Okay. PRN, pharmacists use this language, doctors use this language all the time. It is an actual term abbreviation that means as needed. As needed. So you see that these industry-specific terms, sometimes abbreviations, definitions that we all use. I don't care what industry you work in, unless you are specific, unless your industry is so general. A lot of times, these specific industries have these own terms that nobody else seems to understand unless you're part of that world. And they speak to each other in this shorthand type of way, and you can actually be left completely out of conversation if you don't know what it is that they do. Look, finance people do the same thing. If you work in a finance business and banking, they do that. So it could be any social group, it could be any profession. Argot is not necessarily, it is a subcultural way of speaking, culture within culture. So if you're a part of that culture within culture, you will probably have your own set of terms, which can be called an argot. That's what technically it is. And so a lot of people do not differentiate that from slang, but it actually is quite a different thing. It's kind of a specialized vocabulary, specialized speech, if you want to think of it that way, that creates identity, reinforces identity, or maintains identity, or allows people within the same social group quicker interaction without having to sort of explain everything that they say to each other. Okay? And that's, of course, a little bit different from slang. Slang we're more familiar with. So there's a few slang words from the United States. If you ever wondered about, on page 275, those words are still pretty much in use. So you want to educate yourself on slang, this is it. When I first moved to the United States in the 90s, I actually bought a dictionary of slang. And I read it. You know why? Because I wanted to know what in the world the people were speaking around me about. I needed to understand. So slang is a good thing to know. So that those terms, I actually looked them over. They're still very much current. So that's good. And then there's British slang there for you as well on the next page, which doesn't make much sense to you unless you're British. And slang is like that. It doesn't have to mean, anything. Why do we use the words to, the way we do? It's just something that comes to be. And then it sticks, and all of a sudden it isn't used for a while. But then it falls out of fashion. Okay? So that's a funny way we use language. So besides the slang and besides the argot, then there's new version of short speak, and that's texting. So if you text with people, I don't know, maybe something like that exists even in other languages as well. But in English, when you text in English, there are certain terms that you use very quickly, and they're abbreviations. Why? Because when you text, you don't want to type out the whole word. You just do a shorthand. And so these are some of the shorthands that people use. Once again, if somebody texts you that, you have no idea what that means unless you are in that way of speaking. So you would no idea. Somebody would say, oh, that was TMI. And like, okay, I don't know what that means. That was TMI. Unless you understand that TMI stands for too much information, meaning I didn't need to know that. Why do you tell me this big, long story? You could have just saved yourself the trouble. All right. Next funny way of speaking that we have that is confusing to everyone around us is idioms. We already talked about idioms. I love idioms. I think idioms make language colorful, but they're also very, very confusing. And they never translate from language to language. American idioms are absolutely funny and hilarious to me. I love them, but I also like to make fun of Americans by talking about their idioms because they make absolutely no sense. When I came, specifically in the South, there was quite a few idioms that struck me as a really weird ones. Have you ever heard any weird idioms? You guys want to share a weird idiom that you heard and you're like, what in the world? Why did they say that? So here's one that I heard that made me think, like, how in the world? It's raining cats and dogs. You hear that one? Now, what does it mean, raining cats and dogs? Like cats and dogs falling from the sky? I mean, I just visualize this picture of a cloud, and cats and dogs are falling from the cloud as if they're being the raindrops. And I said, what kind of a crazy way to express that? Why can't you just say it's raining hard or something like that? No, it's raining cats and dogs. I'm like, okay, makes no sense. How about this? There's more than one way to skin a cat. You heard that one? No, that's a new one for you? Well, number one, I don't know why would anyone want to skin a cat. That sounds cruel. You know, I have a cat. I like my cat. Okay. Definitely don't want to skin a cat. Why would anyone want to skin a cat? I have no idea. Americans don't even eat cats. So why would they skin them? I don't know. But they say that. What they mean by it is that there's more than one way to do something. That's what they mean. But they say that about, you know, about cats, you know, or, and so I always joke that American idioms always have to do something with animal cruelty. You know, it's either cats and dogs falling out of the sky or skinning cats or something like that. It's funny. But idioms are very culture bound. And unless you know what that phrase means in that culture, most of the time you have no idea and you will not be able to figure it out. Okay, so here's a whole list of American idioms over here that we have on page 277 that maybe you have never heard before in your life. And if a person if English is not their native language, they have no idea to figure out what that means. Maybe there's an equivalent in your culture. Maybe there's not. You know, how about this one? Now just hold your horses. Now, what does that mean? I'm having a conversation with you, and all of a sudden I say, no, just hold your horses. You're like, wait a minute, I'm not driving any horses. I don't have any horses. Our conversation is about any horses. Why do I have to hold my horses? What they mean is that stop. All they're trying to say is stop. Do not move forward. Let's pause for a moment. This is what they're trying to say. Hold your horses means stop. Okay. That's a very long way of trying to explain that you want me to stop or pause or something like that. Or how about this one? Of course it's true. I got it from the grapevine. I got it from the grapevine? I'm like, is that where you get, you know, grapevine is an idiom in America for gossip. I heard it from somebody else. Why? Because the grapevine does what? It kind of strings along, right? It stretches from one place to the other. It's a vine. So I got it from the grapevine, meaning it was passed to me from somewhere else. So I got it from the grapevine. That's the idea. It's a gossip. So let's look at the nuts and bolts of the deal. How about that? Nuts and bolts of a deal. What the person is trying to say is that let's look at the particulars. Let's look at what this is made of. It's like, let's take it apart, you know, as if it was something mechanical or something like that. Nuts and bolts is basically an idiom for saying the contents or the specifics, you know, funny things like that. Do not listen to John. He's got an axe to grind. Now, what in the world does that mean? That somebody has an axe to grind. Well, you know what? Actually, it means he's angry at someone. Do not listen to John. He is angry at this guy. He has an axe to grind against such and such person. Grinding your axe is like sharpening your axe, right? In old days, there would be a wheel, and I'll take my axe and I put it on the wheel and I make it sharp. Why am I making it sharp? Because I'm going to go butcher you with that axe. So he has an axe to grind, meaning he has evil, bad thoughts about this person. He doesn't like that person. And so he doesn't want to, you know, don't listen to him about this particular topic or this particular person because he has, you know, a negative predisposition against that person. He's planning to murder him. Basically, that's what it's saying. It's funny. Idioms are hilarious, but they make no sense to a person who is an outsider to the culture unless that you know exactly what it means. And the only way to figure them out is to hear them used over and over and over in language. So, and so these are all true idioms. If you read this list and it makes no sense to you, you just have to learn English a little bit more and get acculturated a little bit more, because people use these every day, every single one of these, all the time. You know, opening a can of worms, that last one, that's hilarious. Now, who would want to put a bunch of worms in a can to begin with, and why in the world would you be opening it? Okay. By continuing this course of action, she's opening a can of worms. To open a can of worms means basically to get into something that you do not want. That's what it means. Now, why it's a can of worms, I can't explain to you. I have no idea why people pick that. But that is how people speak every day, all day long. And you simply have to learn it to understand them. All right. So let's see. The next section is all about different languages. And then interpreting. So let's pause here for a little while, guys. Take it like a 10-minute break. We'll come back and catch up to this. Let's see. It's I have 10:13 on my clock, so 10 minutes. Okay. Stretch out, walk around, grab a coffee, whatever you got to do. Okay. And I'll be back, and we'll continue on to different languages and how people speak.